Back in July of 2018, DC Comics handed complete control of Superman over to Brian Michael Bendis. Now, this was a big deal and a very controversial decision, considering Bendis had never written a DC Comics character before, and most of his recent work had incredibly poor fan reception. But, despite this, DC still handed over control of both the Superman title and Action Comics to Bendis, and ever since then, my favorite character in all of fiction, Superman, has been fast-tracked to complete destruction. Now, to fully understand how bad things have gotten, we need to go back to New 52. The New 52 was a DC Comics reboot back in 2011. It was seen as a way to streamline some characters' histories, to make it easier for new readers to jump on, and a way to modernize certain characters. With Superman, they decided to make him less of a Boy Scout and a bit more of a cool guy, I guess you could say. Superman was no longer married to Lois, he was now dating Wonder Woman. Him and Batman didn't have that tight friendship they had before, and Superman himself just seemed a lot less like a guy who tried to do his best and always do the right thing. They even went so far as to start an event called Superman Truth. This event led to Superman's secret identity being outed by Lois Lane. He was depowered to the level he was back when he first appeared in 1938, and his strength was closer to Captain America's level than modern-day Superman's level. He also shaved his head, started wearing a t-shirt and jeans, and tore up his old cape and used it as a cover for his knuckles. And oh yeah, if that didn't make him more relatable to the kids, his new mode of transportation was a motorcycle. Needless to say, it was a rough time to be a Superman fan. Superman was now some edgy dude that rode a motorcycle. Fans did not like this, and it didn't take long for DC to give Superman his powers back and reset Superman to how he was at the beginning of the New 52. Shortly after this, DC had a universe-wide event called Convergence. Now, Convergence was a terrible event, but it did do some good things. For instance, the new character introduced in this event, Telos, brought pre-New 52 Superman into the New 52 universe. Telos captured a lot of places from different universes and put them under domes that took away their powers until he could take off the domes and set them up to fight each other. We learned in a tie-in book written by legendary Superman writer Dan Jurgens that while pre-New 52 Superman was under one of those domes, he impregnated his wife Lois Lane. Now this was previously impossible because Clark and Lois's biology was too different, but because of the dome taking away Superman's powers, it made it possible for Clark to impregnate Lois. Anyways, long story short, Lois gives birth to their son, Jon, named after Superman's adopted father, Jon Kent. They survived the event and now live as a family on a farm in the New 52 universe. Pre-New 52 Superman and New 52 Superman now coexist in the same universe, but not for long. DC set up a whole storyline where New 52 Superman is dying. This was obviously set up so fan favorite pre-New 52 Superman could take his place, and that is exactly what happened. We get a wonderful story from Dan Jurgens called Superman, Lois and Clark Road to Rebirth, which showed us how Clark and his family are adjusting to this new universe and what their lives are like. In short, New 52 Superman was just a terrible idea and Superman fans were suffering, so DC Comics had the bright idea to have Dan Jurgens come in and save the character by reintroducing pre-New 52 Superman, and it was awesome and it worked. After the Lois and Clark storyline, we enter Rebirth. Rebirth was a new golden age for Superman fans. You had Dan Jurgens writing Action Comics and Peter Tomasi along with Patrick Gleason writing the Superman title. So many interesting things were happening at this time. We got to see how Clark was as a family man. Lex Luthor was still a good guy at this point, so pre-New 52 Superman had to learn to trust this Lex he didn't know that was apparently a good guy. Superman had to reintroduce himself to this Earth's Justice League. It was awesome, and it went on for a while until July 2018 when everything came crashing down. At the time of this recording, Bendis has written somewhere around 40 Superman comics, so for the sake of time, I will not be covering every issue that he has written in this video. What I will primarily be covering is the Man of Steel miniseries, Superman issues 1 through 14, and Superman issue 18, as well as Action Comics issues 1 through 4. So if I don't cover some of the horrendous things Bendis has done to Superman, that's why. Now that I've covered New 52 Superman and Rebirth Superman, let's talk about what Bendis has done. His run started off decent enough with a 6-issue miniseries titled Man of Steel. Bendis' biggest addition at the start of his run is a new villain called Rogol-Zar. Now, if you're a Superman fan, you might look at this guy and go, he's not new, that's the guy Superman fought on Warworld forever ago. But you're wrong, this is not Draga. This is a new hideous monster who hates Superman but also happens to wear his symbol and has extra A's in his name. Yeah, Bendis isn't always the most original guy. Rogol-Zar is some type of monster that Bendis introduced as possibly being the man behind the destruction of Krypton. This is the first of many retcons by Bendis. Before, there was no person behind Krypton's destruction. It was just a natural disaster, but Bendis thought it would be wise to introduce a new character and allude to the fact that he might have destroyed Krypton. And that's all there is to his character, by the way. Bendis never fleshes out the character of Rogol-Zar beyond him just being a monster that doesn't like Kryptonians. Anyways, let's get back to the Man of Steel miniseries. The first issue opens with Rogol-Zar pleading with some kind of planetary council known as the Circle. He's begging them to wipe out Krypton. He claims Krypton is going through resources too fast and will eventually start draining resources from other planets and cause those planets to go under, so his solution is to wipe out all of Krypton. The Circle obviously tells him no, but then we go to the modern day and we see Superman is alone. Lois and Jon are both gone somewhere, and through flashbacks throughout the series we learn they went with Jor-el. Now, let me tell you about Jor-el and why none of this makes sense. So, during Superman Rebirth, a storyline called The Oz Effect was written in Action Comics by Dan Jurgens. The story involved a villain named Mr. Oz, who was causing all kinds of chaos for Superman by having his followers enact random acts of violence. It was revealed during this story that Mr. Oz was Jor-el. You may be asking, how did Jor-el survive Krypton's explosion? That's a good question. The answer is Dr. Manhattan snatched him out of Krypton the second it exploded and then sent him to Earth. Anyone that has read Rebirth and Doomsday Clock will know why Dr. Manhattan is in the DC universe, and why he did this, but we don't need to get into that right now. When Jor-el was first sent to Earth, he was in bad condition. He had kryptonite chunks in him from the explosion, and he could barely move. He was also landed in a third world country that was under the rule of a dictator. He is taken in by a family that nurses him back to health. One day, a member of that family snitches to the dictator that they have been taking care of a stranger. He did that because if you do stuff for the dictator, then you get all kinds of perks, because obviously food and water and things like that and necessities are rare there, but the dictator has it and plentiful. So if you snitch to him, if you do something he wants, then he'll reward you. So that's why this member of the family did that. This causes the dictator and his men to go to the family's house and shoot up the entire family in front of Jor-el. Jor-el then kills all of them and then is promptly teleported by Dr. Manhattan to a room where he has Jor-el strapped down and shows him all the terrible things humanity has ever done. He shows them the World Wars, the Crusades, and a ton of other stuff. Basically, every evil act mankind has ever committed. This is what shapes Jor-el's view of humanity. Throughout the Oz Effect storyline, Jor-el is trying to convince Clark that he was wrong to send him to Earth because at their core, humans are bad people that will never change and do not deserve Superman. He's trying to get Superman and his family to leave Earth and join him on some alien planet. At the end of the story, Superman destroys Jor-el's staff, which it turns out was manipulating him, because throughout this entire storyline, Jor-el had this weird looking staff he was holding, and it turns out once Superman destroyed it, that's what was manipulating Jor-el. Jor-el then tells Superman that after the explosion of Krypton, there was kryptonite lodged in his skull, and the staff helped relieve the pain, and that's why he carried it. He also says he never meant to hurt anyone and that he's sick. And then Dr. Manhattan teleports him. He teleports Jor-el away, and we don't know where he took him. But that was the last time we saw Jor-el before Bendis brought him back. In the Man of Steel miniseries, Jor-el shows up at Clark's apartment and tells him he needs to take his son around the galaxy so he can be a man. Clark and Lois say no, but Jon ignores them and goes in and says he's going. Lois then says that's fine and she'll go with him. Her reasoning for letting him go is because her and Clark can't stop him. Except they can. That's their job as parents, to make decisions that their child is too young and inexperienced to make. But nope, instead of being good parents, they let Jon go with his crazy grandfather, who, last time we saw him, was a sick man with a warped perception of humanity and under the control of Dr. Manhattan. But sure, let your son go with him. Also, we don't know how Jor-el is back. Like, what is it? What if this is a trap? Last time he was sent here basically as a trap for, as a test for Superman. But now he's back and it's like, oh, he's definitely in his right mind this time. He just wants to take our child with him to space. Makes sense. Why would you let your child go with him? It doesn't make any sense. But Lois also gives another great reason for letting Jon go. She says that she's letting him go because she wants to go with Jon so she can write a book about the experience. That's a reoccurring theme, by the way. Bendis writes Lois as some headline-hungry whore who doesn't care about anything other than getting the scoop first and getting the big headline. Now, back to the present, Rogol-Zar decides to head to Earth because he realizes the last living Kryptonians are there and he wants to take them out. When he gets to Earth, the first thing he does is break into the Fortress of Solitude and destroy the bottled city of Kandor. Superman finds out about this later and goes on the hunt for whoever destroyed Kandor. He meets Rogol, they have a fight, and I actually really like the way Bendis writes Clark during this fight. He's not just some idiot that just wants to punch Rogol-Zar. Clark is constantly thinking and assessing the situation, but nonetheless, Superman loses a fight and passes out from getting his ass kicked so bad, but then Rogol-Zar just disappears instead of killing him. They fight again in issue 5 of Man of Steel, but this time in space, and it's the same result. Rogol beats Superman unconscious and then leaves. Superman and Rogol fight again in the final issue, but before we can see the result of this fight, Supergirl shows up and puts Rogol Zar in the Phantom Zone. Talk about an unsatisfying ending. This whole series had been Rogol Zar versus Superman. Superman was always losing. I was excited to see how it ended and if Superman had learned anything from his prior encounters with Rogol so he could beat him, but nope. Supergirl just shows up and throws him in the Phantom Zone. Just a terrible way to end the miniseries. It's also odd that in the series we see the Justice League is made aware of Rogol Zar, but they never attempt to help Superman fight him in any way. But yeah, now that you have the basis for Bendis' run on Superman, let's get into what he did after the miniseries with the Superman family. Starting off with Superman's own son, Jonathan Kent. In Superman issue 6, Jon returns from his adventure with his grandfather Jor-el, but when he returns, he is 6 years older than he was when he left. Yes, Jon left an 11-year-old boy and came back a 17-year-old. Now, this is only one of the elements that ruins this Superman family. Jon is now basically an adult and doesn't need his parents anymore. In fact, that's something Bendis has Clark, Lois, and Jor-el repeat throughout the entire book. Everyone is always talking about how Jon is no longer just a boy and can take care of himself. So, Bendis ruined one of the greatest additions to the Superman mythos of the past decade. Seeing Lois and Clark adjust to being parents and dealing with all that comes with that responsibility was one of my favorite aspects of Superman Rebirth. And I was excited to see Lois and Clark deal with Jon growing up, but instead of all those years of potentially great stories to be told, it's stolen from us by Bendis. And when Jon comes back, no one is even that upset or shaken up by his age up. There are so many huge revelations in this book that Bendis will reveal a character might get emotional about it for a page or two, and then they're over it like it was nothing. And that's exactly how Jon's age up is handled. Clark is initially furious about it, then is like, whatever, and that's it. Jon's age up doesn't only ruin the parent dynamic of the book, but also ruins his relationship with Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne is a character that I only really like when either Grant Morrison or Peter Tomasi writes him. Other than those two, I don't really care about him. He tends to get on my nerves. A great way of making Damian more likable was Jon. Jon helped redeem Damian in many ways, and they had a great friendship. Jon was a great escape for Damian. Damian is constantly dealing with a dark, depressing world that his father lives in, but when he's hanging out with Jon, that all changes. He comes over to the Kent's place and Lois makes him pie, or him and Jon will go on a huge spaceship adventure. It's fun stuff that Damian normally wouldn't get exposed to. But that's all gone now because Jon is now 17, Damian is still just a kid. Also, Jon just completely ignoring his parents, deciding to go with his psycho grandfather is very much against his character. In Superman Rebirth, we saw that Jon respects his father and looks up to him. So him ignoring Clark's decision doesn't make sense. You may be asking yourself, why did Bendis age Jon up? It seems to do more harm than good and ruins a lot of good story opportunities. Well, we learned that the whole reason he did this was because he wanted to put Jon in the Legion of Superheroes. An 11-year-old boy doesn't fit in well with the Legion. Yeah, that was Bendis' whole reason for ruining one of the best, most interesting additions to Superman. And the way he adds them to the Legion of Superheroes is so stupid. Jon creates the United Planets for whatever reason, because there's big space wars going on, and then Jon is like, hey, you guys should have like the United Nations like we have on Earth, except do it in space. And all these people that are warring and don't give a crap about Jon are suddenly like, that boy's smart, we should do that, and they agree. And then the Legion of Superheroes show up and they're like, hey Jon, you should join us. And Jon's like, let me think about it. And then he joins them, and Lois and Clark are like, okay. And keep in mind, at this point in continuity, with how everything works, since New 52 Superman and pre-New 52 Superman were morphed, this Superman had not joined in with the Legion of Superheroes yet. So he is not very familiar with the Legion of Superheroes, and he's not like, oh yeah, these are the kids that I went with when I was a kid. No, these are just new heroes that came from the future, and he's totally fine with his son going with him and doesn't really care, even though his son, he just got back not too long ago from his psycho grandfather. It just doesn't make any sense. It's another big revelation. We're like, holy crap, my son's gonna be sent to the future, and he's gonna be gone. And everyone's just like, it's whatever. It's just so weird. They don't act like people in this book. The reactions from these characters do not make sense. But let's move on to Lois Lane. Like I said earlier, Lois is all about getting the scoop or big headline. Bendis' Lois does not give a single shit about her family. So, in Man of Steel, both Jonathan Kent and Lois Lane went with Jor-el on his space trip. but Lois returned way before Jon did. We learn about this in Action Comics. Throughout Bendis' run, we see people teasing Clark, saying that Lois left him, because to your average, everyday, normal person that doesn't know she is in space with her super son, it just looks like she quit her job at the Daily Planet and left Clark and took their kid with her. Well, she actually returned almost immediately after going into space, but never told Clark she was back. Clark only finds out she was back because of Cat Grant. When Clark gets this information from Cat, he quickly locates Lois, who is undercover in a wig hiding from her own husband. Clark flies down to her, she takes off her disguise, and they make out in front of a huge group of people, and then they fly away. Yep, the world-famous Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Lois Lane just tongued Superman in front of a huge group of people, even though everyone knows she's married to Clark Kent. Clark and Lois would never be dumb enough to do this. Clark and Lois Lane are married, they have a child, they have secrets to protect. This would not happen. Imagine the amount of teasing and bullying Jon would get from all his classmates over his dad getting cucked by Superman. But Bendis didn't care. Anyways, after making out in front of dozens of people, they fly back to where Lois is staying. Lois tells Clark that once they got up in space, Jon came alive and Jor-el was right. He needed that space trip. Lois decided that her 11-year-old son didn't need her, so she left him to come back to Earth to write a book. Yes, Lois left her 11-year-old son with his insane grandfather, who last time she saw him, he was causing chaos, inciting followers to kill, and trying to convince Clark to leave Earth because humans are all rotten on the inside. But yeah, leave your child with that guy. Makes sense. Lois has got to be one of the worst mothers in comics. She justifies the fact that she never told Clark she was back by saying that normal life rules do not apply to them and their relationship isn't normal, so they don't have responsibilities to each other. It makes no sense, and Lois comes off more like she should be an Arkham than she should be a mother. She literally says Jon doesn't need her. What? Your 11-year-old son is in space somewhere you do not know about with his former evil grandfather, and you're okay with that? This doesn't make any damn sense. And Clark's response doesn't make any sense. He doesn't care that she tried to hide from him and never told him she was back. He doesn't care that she abandoned their son with a psychopath in deep space. None of these reactions are normal. It gets even worse once Jon actually comes back. When he comes back, 6 years older than he was when he left, one of the first things Lois says to him is, "How about you give me the headline?" Yeah, that's the reaction a mother should have to her son who she hasn't seen in weeks, who just came back and is now 6 years older than the last time she saw him. Bendis writes Lois as a selfish piece of garbage that only cares about advancing in her career. She doesn't give a crap about Clark or her son. When Jon came back, he starts telling his parents about what happened while he was in space. During this, Superman gets mad and leaves because he's so angry he needs to hit something. While flying around, he finds Mongol and takes him out, and then comes back and tells Lois what happens. Lois's first reaction is, "Oh nice, anything we can use at the paper?" Her husband just fought someone who was occasionally a Justice League level threat, but she doesn't care to ask if he's okay, if Mongol did anything, or why he was on Earth in the first place. She just wants the headline. There's a point way later on in Bendis' run where Lois tells her father, who hates Superman by the way, that she is in love with Superman and he is the father of her child. Yep, she just told her father that she's been cheating on Clark with Superman, and Clark is a dumbass who doesn't know that he's raising a kid that isn't his. I really don't get Bendis' obsession with having Superman cut Clark in the view of the public. It's just weird, man. There's also a point in Action Comics where Lex Luthor sends a package to Lois and she just opens it. Keep in mind, at this point in the DC universe, Lex was assumed dead by the public, so why would Lois open a package from her husband's recently deceased arch nemesis? What if before Lex died he figured out who Superman really was and this was his final way to get back at him, by killing his wife with something in the package? But Bendis' Lois is too dumb to think of that possibility, so she just opens the package. It's also revealed later on that Lois has been writing a story in her head about outing her husband as Superman ever since they got married, so that's nice. Now on to Superman's biological father, Jor-el. I already went over how Jor-el was saved from the explosion of Krypton and what he did after that, but let's talk about what Bendis did to his character. First off, Bendis never explains how Jor-el escaped Dr. Manhattan. The last time we saw Jor-el, he finally had some clarity thanks to Superman destroying the staff that was originally controlling him, but a moment later he was taken away by Dr. Manhattan. Bendis never addresses this. The big revelation with Jor-el is that he is the one who created Ragozar and set him loose in the galaxy. We don't get any explanation for why he created Ragozar and released him, just that he did and kept it a secret. Because Jor-el did this, he was sentenced by the secret society we talked about earlier called the Circle to die back on Krypton like he originally was supposed to. So why did Dr. Manhattan bring Jor-el back? And the Oz effect, it seemed like he brought Jor-el back as a way to test Superman, but the second time, why did he bring Jor-el back? Jor-el failed the first time at convincing Superman that humans are hopeless and will never change, so Dr. Manhattan took Jor-el back. But this time when he appears, it seems Dr. Manhattan has nothing to do with it. I can't help but think that Dan Jurgens or Jeff Johns had something cool in mind for Jor-el, and that's why they had Dr. Manhattan grab him at the end of Oz effect, but we will never get to see what their plan was with that character because Bendis sent him back to Krypton to die. Also, it's just like he never even read the Oz effect. It seems like he didn't read anything from Superman Rebirth. Like, Bendis had no clue about what was going on prior to him picking up the book other than, oh, Superman has a kid. That seems to be the only thing that he knew. But if you looked at Jor-el and the role he played in Bendis' story, all he did was take Jon to space, resulting in him aging up 6 years, and he also created Ragazar, a new villain that possibly destroyed Krypton. In Oz Effect, at least it was explained that Jor-el was a good guy that was corrupted by Dr. Manhattan, but in Bendis' story, Jor-el was a piece of garbage far before that. He was a man that held many secrets and created a murderous creature that possibly destroyed his planet. Jor-el is no longer the scientist that wanted to save his doomed homeworld, but it was ignored by ignorant leaders, so he did the only thing he could do to preserve Krypton's future, which was send his son to Earth. No, Jor-el, the noble scientist, is no more. Now we have Jor-el, the secret-keeping warmonger that was behind his entire race's extinction and the reason his son grew up without his parents. This would be like finding out Thomas Wayne hired Joe Chill to kill him in Martha and Crime Alley. But Jor-el is just another legendary Superman character that Bendis destroyed. Something I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about Jon is what happened to him when he got aged up. So he got aged up because on his space trip with Jor-el, they went through a black hole, and that sent him to Earth 3. So Earth 3 is where the Crime Syndicate is, which is just an evil version of the Justice League, and there he runs into Ultraman, which looks and sounds exactly like his dad, but acts very different. Ultraman captures him, puts him in a volcano. Jonathan Kent doesn't know how long he was in that volcano, by the way, but he's in that volcano getting tortured day in and day out. He's literally just there while Ultraman will come in randomly, torture him, and grieve to him, like tell him random things, like Jon's sort of his therapist. And then Jon escaped, and after that he runs into his mom, Lois Lane, who is Superwoman in this universe, and she tries to kill him. So Bendis decided it was a good idea to have who was 11-year-old Jonathan Kent go and get tortured by his parents and have them try to kill him, because that was a cool traumatic experience that Jon needed to go through. Now on to the man himself, Superman. I'll be honest, the way Bendis writes the character of Superman isn't that terrible. He's generally always trying to help people, acts like Superman around your everyday civilians, and has some good moments. For instance, there's a part where, through a series of events, Earth gets put into the Phantom Zone. This causes mass riots because everyone believes the world is ending, so they go and do whatever they want, like vandalizing signs and stealing stuff. But while Superman is trying to figure out all the Phantom Zone stuff, he flies into the middle of a riot, tells everyone to stop, and then he flies back up to where he was and doing what he was doing, and everyone, when he leaves, puts all the stuff back and stops acting out. It's like, oh man, I told you Superman would know. It's a good moment that shows Clark's faith in people, that he knows these people aren't all bad, they're just acting out because of this insane apocalyptic circumstance they're under. Superman could have taken them all to jail, but instead he just talked. I like seeing that. And I also like everyone's respect for Superman. No one second guesses him, everyone just listens and stops. But those moments are rare. Bendis' Superman has anger issues. Like I said earlier, Clark's son is telling him what happened while he was alone in space with his crazy grandfather, and Clark just up and leaves in the middle of his story because he's mad and he needs to hit something, and he ends up fighting Mongol. Superman does something similar another time when he's talking to Perry White, and he gets upset about something that's been happening in Metropolis, so he flies into space and destroys some asteroids. Seeing Superman with anger issues is just weird. Now, while I said Bendis' Superman isn't terrible, his Clark very much is. Clark Kent is literally a cuck and a pushover and just terrible at everything. After reading Bendis' run on both Action Comics and Superman, I can safely say that Bendis hates Clark Kent. He does everything he can to destroy him, including outing his identity in Superman number 18. In Superman issue 18, Superman decides he doesn't want to be like his father and keep secrets, so he holds a press conference and reveals to the world that he is Clark Kent. Bendis views the Clark Kent persona as a dirty little secret, and this really shows that Bendis doesn't understand Superman or Clark Kent at all. The false equivalency of saying Jor-el creating a being of mass mass destruction and releasing it on the galaxy without telling anyone is somehow equal to Superman being journalist Clark Kent is baffling. Superman makes a lot of dumb judgment calls throughout Bendis' run, like letting his son go with Jor-el on a space adventure, kissing Lois while he's in Superman in front of a crowd of people, thus making Lois look like a cheating whore and Clark Kent look like a pathetic cuck. But the worst decision was to reveal his identity, especially because he says he still plans on being a journalist. This makes no sense. Clark Kent's stories are now all biased and illegitimate. He can no longer go undercover, he can't write anything about Superman, all of his past stories are not credible anymore, and he puts loads of people in danger. Everyone Clark Kent ever cared about is now in the crossfire of every villain that hates him. Yeah, his son may have powers, but Lois doesn't, neither does Jimmy or Cat Grant or Perry White. This is the dumbest, most selfish thing Clark Kent has ever done. Also, this concept isn't even original. 4 years ago, we had an event called Superman Truth that I talked about earlier. And guess what? The genius Brian Michael Bendis titled this event, Superman Truth. What a smart, original story. Aside from ruining beloved characters, one of the worst aspects of this run is the storytelling. Bendis will introduce an idea, not explain anything about it for over a dozen issues, and then act like he resolves it in the final issue by not actually resolving it. Take Rogozar for instance. He was introduced as this villainous creature that destroyed Krypton in Man of Steel #1. In the span of 20 or so issues, we learn almost nothing else about him. He fights Superman a bunch and beats him almost every time, but never kills him for whatever reason. It's implied that he was behind Krypton's destruction, but we never get a clear answer whether he did it or not, and we never learn of how he destroyed it if he was behind it. Rogozar's story goes like this. He's introduced in Man of Steel #1 as possibly being behind the destruction of Krypton. In the span of 19 issues, nothing else is explained, and then in Superman issue 15, it's revealed that Jor-el created him. That's it. That's Rogozar's entire story, and that's exactly how the storyline Action Comics went as well. A turtle-like pace where nothing is ever really explained or revealed, and then Bendis considers it wrapped up without ever actually advancing the plot. It's terrible. But I think I've ranted about Bendis Superman enough, but I hope you guys get my point. Superman is my favorite character in all of fiction, and he's had a lot of ups and downs, but we had reached what I thought was a new golden age with Rebirth, but then Bendis came in and tore it all down. He's actively destroying my favorite character, and I can't stand seeing it. I gave him a chance, hoping he would do better at DC than he had done recently at Marvel, but no, he is still awful. Bendis does not understand Superman and why he works as a character, and he certainly does not understand his family. I know comics are ever changing, so who knows how long the Bendis reign of terror will last, but dear God, I don't think I've ever wanted anything to be retconned as badly as this man's run on Superman. Please, if anyone from DC Comics is listening, save Superman. He needs help.